going to first look at the historical context of AI as a whole, right? So we can kind of, this technological revolution that's actually happening right now with generative AI, it's not really something new, because up till now, a lot of our humanity has actually seen a lot of these moments in time happen, right? So we can break these things down into three buckets, where we had the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, and then now the Computer, Internet, AI revolution, right? So just zooming in slightly further, when if we take it the Industrial Revolution, for example, the what really changed this was the introduction of the steam engine, right? So up till this point, a lot of farming tasks were done manually with a lot of animal labor, right? But once steam-powered machines were introduced, this allowed factories to be able to operate anywhere, not just rivers, and it opened up a whole new possibility of different locations for factories and how they can operate, right? So this really mechanized production as a whole. And even if you see the graph here, once the introduction of the steam engine happened, which is the red line here, you can see there was a huge increase in productivity, which is the green line. And this really revolutionized the way we worked as a whole. And then then we transition into the 19th century, where we had the agricultural revolution, right? So this is moving further away from factories onto the fields. And the introduction of the gas-powered tractor is what really inevitably replaced the heavy steam engines that I just talked about. And this allowed a lot fewer farmers to cultivate more land. And then this freed up labor for cities and factories as a whole, right? And so as a result, what ended up happening? Same thing, an increase in productivity and efficiency. And now here we are, fast forward till today, we have the current AI revolution that's happening. And while a lot of you guys, when you are thinking of the word AI, you may associate it to tech companies like Meta or Google or perhaps even Amazon, right? But in fact, Coca-Cola has actually been at the forefront of this AI revolution. And you can see here, AI is actually going to be changing a lot of different industries. It's not just marketing or writing that you see mainly publicized in the news, but anything from banking, energy, retail, industry, health, public service. So and even if this report that's done by Accenture, they note that 40% of working hours across industries will be impacted by large language models such as ChatGPT, Google Gemini. And as I mentioned earlier, Coke is at the very forefront of this, right? So some of the ways that you may be aware are perhaps the marketing campaigns it's done, but beyond that, Coca-Cola has been doing so many innovative ways to actually explore AI, whether they be implementing AI into the supply chain process, or whether it's creating AI-powered vending machines. Coca-Cola is one of the forefront leaders that are leveraging AI to really accelerate growth, but also expand itself as an AI brand. So before I continue, I will share this video here where you guys can get a better look at just how Coca-Cola has been moving towards AI. You guys can see my screen and I will play it. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome. So if you guys saw in some of those clips there, Some of the things are things that are happening right now, but also some of the things are the things that are planning to happen, especially with this AI boom. So let me see if I can share again right there. Awesome. So you guys can see the slide here. So then you might now be wondering, how has Coca-Cola been using AI thus far, right? Beyond just thinking about the future, how has Coca-Cola been using AI thus far? So there's a couple of ways that Coca-Cola has been doing, as I shared earlier in the before the video. But one key factor that Coca-Cola has been doing it is in manufacturing, right? So one of the ways that they did it was implementing what is intelligent automation system to improve the manufacturing process as a whole, right? So for example, one key example here was with this Coca-Cola Singapore plant, right? So at the time they were struggling capacity constraints, and this was really leading to a bottleneck of throughput. And while of course they could have just added more workers, in the long term, this was not sustainable, right? And also not very cost efficient. So over time, instead, they implemented an AI-driven automation system, which they combined with smart robotics, as you guys see in the photos. And what this ultimately did was create this sort of infrastructure of smart manufacturing, similar to the smartphone or the smart home, smart manufacturing. And the results here were super astounding. It increased labor productivity by nearly 80%, and changeover times reduced by over 60%. And they actually saw a 40% ROI increase with a 12-month payback. And it's not just manufacturing that got affected as well. They also used it to increase efficiency for operations, right? So previously, before, they were using manual forklifts, and one of the key issues is that they're experiencing a lot of increased complexity, limited capacity, and overall, this was actually impeding and preventing throughput. So in order to fix this, Coca-Cola leveraged automated guided vehicles, or AGV systems, which some of you guys may be aware of. And then they implemented this together with AI models and data to then create optimal paths that these AGV systems could take to improve efficiency across warehouse, right? So naturally, this improved operation efficiency by 92%. And this actually generated a ROI of 1,020%. Now that's huge, right? So 1,020% was of ROI was increased just from this change alone. And then thirdly, another way that Coca-Cola implemented AI was building out recommendation systems or suggested order systems, right? So this helped to improve customer orders and in turn sales. So previously, the traditional order systems that they had was a little bit outdated, and it actually was struggling to keep up with the pace of the market demands. But in order to fix this, Coca-Cola leveraged AI models and algorithms to create this sort of suggested order system. And this helped sales coverage in fragmented trade outlets that it helped to increase from 32% all the way to 45 to 50%. And of course, naturally, because this helped improve the user experience and customer experience at large, customer adherence improved, and there was a huge uptick in sales. And so some of you guys may have be a little bit more. Is there an example of additive manufacturing in Coke? We will get back to your question after Jacqueline, but thanks for the question for sure. But some of the examples that you guys see in the suggested order systems, for sure, maybe you guys may be very familiar with, is Netflix, right? So in the same regard, Netflix also implemented a similar suggested order, more they call it recommendation systems. And this is really one of the reasons why platforms like Amazon, Coca-Cola, Netflix really blew up, because this is when you watch a program, and then based off of your watch data, and then they recommend you, oh, you should watch this next, or you should buy this next, right? And then this helps increase revenue at large. And then finally, with marketing, generative AI, Coca-Cola has actually leveraged generative AI into their marketing campaigns. So if you guys see here, oftentimes we associate Coca-Cola with the holiday season. This is oftentimes because of those pastime commercials. But with more and more people watching TV less and more on the digital age, Coca-Cola wanted to ensure that this association with the holidays and Coca-Cola continued to persist. So then they leveraged the generative AI technology. And what they did was create this real magic at Christmas campaign where they allowed users and customers to enter their website and generate digital holiday cards that they can send over to their family and friends using generative AI. And unsurprisingly, this was super viral. This was a very successful marketing campaign. And there was over about 120,000 artworks submitted within just a month alone. And then, of course, user engagement, customer engagement improved, and also ultimately strengthening that association with Coca-Cola and the holidays, even in the modern times. So before I continue, I'll ask you this question, but I just want to get back to Jacqueline's question. Is there any example of additive manufacturing in Coke? So can you elaborate a little bit further on that, Jacqueline?
Yeah, because I'm looking at additive manufacturing is like the 3D printing, which it also save a lot of time. Is that also considered as part of the AI technology?
Well, 3D printing as a whole is sort of separate, right? But they are with 3D printing technology. They're actually implementing AI automation systems into the software, right? And then that can ultimately create that helps the 3D printers be able to create much faster. So technically, yes, but if you were to put them as a closely associated, no, right? Because let's say you can have 3D printers without the AI software, and then so technically that would not be AI, right? But if you implement the AI software into the actual 3D printing software itself, then yes, it becomes AI fused 3D printing.
All right, thank you.
No problem, no problem. But yeah, so going on to the next question, I want to ask all of you, which AI-driven innovation at Coca-Cola are you most excited about that you guys are aware of? And if not, maybe perhaps give it a little bit of a brainstorm of what AI opportunity at Coca-Cola could you guys explore further, right? And while I will give a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds for you guys to maybe whoever wants to submit first. But if not, I will call on either 2 or 3 of you. So keep in mind. So Amanda Wu wrote, this can be an application for printing spare part, but not sure if already available in our system. Oh, so this was referring to the other. So what about, just because Ronaldin, I see you, Ronaldin Ordones. You're right on my face.
I should have closed my video, my camera.
It's okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. So yeah, what about it could be either or. So what is something that might excite you about what Coca-Cola could do in terms, it doesn't have to be generative AI. It could be AI as a whole, right? So what kind of AI, and there's no wrong answers here, right? So what kind of opportunities do you feel like Coca-Cola could do to really to leverage AI further in the future, or something that they already have done or are doing?
Well, I don't want to sound selfish, but I'm currently working on a project and we're looking at a digital twin solution for that project, how a quality will make the quality value proposition for growth for a certain brand. And we're looking at the digital twin solution. What does it mean? It means that we have a lot of data informations that we have around the system. We are heavily using the Power BI, but we wanted to create a digital twin where we can simulate everything. Right? For example, if if my Minute Maid puppy doesn't have the right amount of juice or vitamins, etc., what will be the cost implications, marketing brands? So I think that's an opportunity for us to have that, like consolidating all the information that we have at the back end as a framework, to have that architectures and that everybody, whether you're technical or non-technical, can just generate that.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer. Yeah, and it's okay. I mean, you can think selfishly. It's fine.
Yeah,
I think
that's
we're
selfish.
all
That's why I'm interested with this training, because the output of that one will be also beneficial to my project as well.
for sure. I think AI has the potential to help everybody in whatever use case, and it's just all about everybody wrapping their heads around how to leverage this or experimenting with this. All right. So thank you for that answer, Ronaldin. I mean, even from my side, when I was doing a little bit of digging and some things that I found that they had done in the past that was really quite innovation. Innovate. Wait, My responded, how quick we can share our information to the partners, customers, consumers for time to market instead of waiting for the whole process. Yes, thank you for this. Yes, thank you. You guys are giving a couple of answers here. I hear of examples of using AI to simulate different designs, materials, shapes. Yes, exactly. So this is something that I was just about to speak on as well, which is the Coca-Cola Y3000 Zero Sugar. So they released this back in 2023, but this was also a really clever way that I felt Coca-Cola leveraged generative AI, because they essentially scraped a lot of sentiment and customer feedback analysis, and then they leveraged this to then fed this to the AI and asked it, oh, what are some types of flavors and what types of flavors that we could create for our next product? And then based off of what generative AI did, produced, they actually created an actual product, the Coca-Cola Y3000 product, right? So this is just a few examples, just like what Ronalyn mentioned. I think is that Coca-Cola has been using AI, but also could be using AI in the future. Cool. So then now we'll move into understanding AI and generative AI. So many of you probably already up for the many years have been hearing all these buzzwords like data science, data analytics, AI, deep learning, machine learning, and so many of these terms being thrown around. And in a way, they can be used interchangeably because they all exist as part of this AI ecosystem bubble. But just for specificity, I'll kind of go into a little bit what each is, right? So data analytics, you can see it as more of like the process of scraping, cleaning, and then transforming and then modeling that data to just get some insights, get some information, right? AI, you can see this as more of an umbrella term, which is about creating machines or software that can perform the tasks that you kind of instructed using the AI that you scraped, right? And then when you take that a little bit of one layer deeper down, then you see machine learning, which is really focusing on creating specific algorithms, leveraging mathematical statistics. And then it learns from past data to then potentially predict what will happen in the future. But this is specifically for, I mean, this is particularly for specific use cases. And then if we go a little bit deeper down, oh, let me scroll a little bit here. If you go a little deeper down, then we go into deep learning, right? So deep learning is just a more advanced form of machine learning. If you kind of think about, if I want to think about explaining it a little bit more simply, and they use what is called AI neural networks, which are really modeled after the brain. So if you see this photo here that I got for everybody, the very top photo here you see is like a computer neural network. And then the bottom here is what is actually the biological brain neural network that exists in all of our minds, right? So when we look at an image of a cat, then our eye processes that information gets processed into different nodes in our brains, which has all these connections together. And then that output of that is in our brain. We say, oh, that's a cat. And then so data scientists and neuroscientists, they all work together to create this same sort of model into the computer, which are the deep neural networks, which is what deep learning is based off of. And the main difference, if you guys are wondering, okay, wait, what is machine learning, deep learning then? The main difference between deep learning and machine learning is that deep learning can handle a lot more data, and it deals with much more complex, intricate patterns, because it's much, as you guys see in the photo, it's much more layered. And then finally, going back, you take a little bit steeper down, layer down, and there's generative AI, right? So generative AI leverages different generative models from deep learning, machine learning, and then it kind of combines all of that to then now create images. So with machine learning and deep learning, it's really about processing, analyzing, and predicting. While generative AI, while it does have predictive capabilities, it's really focused on creating new data, right? Create whether that data be in the form of images, videos, audio. So then you guys might be wondering, okay, so what's the difference from traditional AI, or for the brief of this call, I'll call trad AI and Gen AI, right? So as I mentioned earlier, Gen AI is really focused on, it's a branch of AI that's really focused on, as the name implies, generation, right? Generation of images, generation of text, generation of video, generation of audio, generation of code, right? And while traditional AI is more focused on handling a specific amount of data sets and then working based off of a predefined set of rules that you've kind of instructed it to do, right? And so they're both pros and cons. Neither A or B is better or worse than the other. It's just sort of different use cases, right? So in terms, as you guys see on the slide, when it comes to traditional AI, some of the strengths is that it has more of a predictive analytics capability, and it's quite fast, right? But then the flaws to this is that you're really depending heavily on the data set. So whether that data is clean, whether that data is structured, whether that data is biased or not biased, right? And then it's also there's some level of difficulty for when it comes to interpretation. And then when it comes to generative AI, some of the pros to this is that it's a lot more adaptable, it's a lot more creative. There's a little bit more room for it to kind of think outside the box. But then some of the flaws to that is things called hallucinations, which I'll go into further in the slides. And then it's also very resource intensive. And then in terms of predictability, it may not be as great compared to traditional AI. And so if you guys see this little screenshot here, on the left, you guys will see an example of a typical traditional AI chatbot, right? So it gives you, how can I help you? And then the person asks, when will I receive my refund? But then it says, I'm sorry, I don't really understand your request, because once again, this traditional AI chatbot is really just, it can only do what its predefined rules are, right? Based off of the data set it knows. Compared to the screenshot on the right, this is more of a conversational AI, not really a traditional AI chatbot. So it's been trained on more data and it has more of generative AI functionality. So if somebody says, when will I receive my refund? Even though this is a question that may not be part of its predefined rules, it can kind of go, okay, let me check, and then sort of create an answer based off of that and based off of the existing data that the company may have fed it. So it's much, as you can see, much more adaptable, much more flexible. But of course, if with all this talk about data, it would not make any sense if we did not talk about the data governance, right? Because at the end of the day, one thing is for certain, that AI, all of it is based off of the data that you feed it, right? So it's like you can see data as a baby, and I'm sorry, you can see AI as a baby, and data is the type of nutrition and food that you're going to feed it, right? So if you feed it bad food, then it's probably its health will deteriorate over time, and overall it's just a bad effect on the person or the baby itself, right? It's the same thing with the AI. If you garbage in, garbage out, right? So this is really one of the reasons why as companies and organizations and people as a whole need to really focus on data governance, because there needs to be a process set where there are proper assessments done on the data itself, on the data quality, but also making sure that there's no bias in the data as well, right? So the data is clean, but also there's no bias put into the data, and the quality of the data is good, because you're only going to get the type of output that based off of the input that you put in, right? Which is what leads me to one of the primary examples some of you may have already read about, heard about, which is the kind of Google Gemini fumble, right? Or so what happened a couple months ago, 2 to 3 months ago, was Google released their competitor to ChatGPT, which was Google Gemini, right? Which was previously known as Google Bard. And while everybody was super excited about it because Google was Google, right? When people started playing around with it, then they wrote questions like, okay, so here's what give me an image of the founders of Google. And then they gave, as you guys can see here, they gave this output of 2 Asian men with glasses, right? But for many of you may know, that's not the case, right? Google's founders are Larry Page and Sergey Brin, right? Clearly not 2 Asian men, and clearly men that do not have glasses. So you can see here, it's like the same idea of like, perhaps some of the data that they put in, where they did not, and they fed it stereotype, right? So it's like perhaps some of the data that they fed Google Gemini was not properly assessed, or not properly cleaned, or maybe perhaps there were some biases in the data as well. So this is perhaps why they created this. And so speaking of Google Gemini, this is where some of you may have heard of Google Gemini, some of you may have not, but this is another, once again, as I mentioned, another large language model platform, much similar to ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is one of the very forefront leaders in this, but there's so many tools out there these days that can actually do different generative AI purposes, whether they be actual platforms or softwares that take from the GPT code, or actual LLMs much of itself, right? So some of the things are, as I mentioned, ChatGPT. Another is the Google Gemini. If you see in the middle here, there's something called Claude by Anthropic, and another called Perplexity, right? So if you see in this image here, this is Claude. I personally use this as well. It's a lot of my, it's really great for analysis, but a lot of my friends that are developers, they really rave positively about this, saying that it's really a great coding partner. All right, so it's really great in coding. You can actually start seeing like what you coded live. So it's a great tool for that. And then Perplexity, this is another example of one which I use personally as well. Perplexity. This is really interesting because it's linked with like web data. So it's almost, I wouldn't say it's a complete replacement for Google or Bing, but it's definitely, it helps to accompany that, right? So I kind of implement into my workflow when I want to kind of do some quick ideation, but it gives it, what it does really well is gives like citation and references to where it got its sources from. And then beyond that, there are platforms like GitHub, Copilot, or Replit, which are actually coding platforms that focus specifically on a use case like coding, right? So ChatGPT, Gemini, they're more broad. You know, you can, if there's anything text related or image related, but with these kind of platforms like GitHub, Copilot, they're really focused on the use case for programmers. Right. So an example here in the screenshot you guys see at the bottom right corner, you see that the programmer is interacting with the AI chatbot and saying, hey, okay, give me some suggestions on the code. And so this can really help speeding up the process in terms of coding, as well as giving you suggestions, like giving you suggestions on how to actually fix the code as well. So this is super useful. But beyond just coding and because at the end of the day, that's still text, right? Or beyond anything of like the large language models I provided you. What's really interesting to take note of, and that I want everybody to really pay attention to, is that McKinsey reported that 2023 was the year of generative AI, right? But 2024, it's expected to be the year of multimodal AI, right? So multimodal is just another way of saying leveraging different modes of media. Right. So you have things like DALL-E, which is more image generation. Then you have platforms like OpenAI Sora, which is going to be based off of video generation. Right. So if you see in this little chart here that I showed you, unimodal AI is just you feed one unique type of media, which is either text or image, and then you just get one output, right, of media. But multimodal AI, which is 2024 is really going to be focusing on, is you can feed it images and get text, or you can feed it text and get images, or you can feed it text, images, and video and get some sort of result, gets a sort of output that you wish. So it's going to be a really exciting time for 2024. And it's not, I think this is one of the things to really pay attention to, because it's not just something that will happen, but it already has been happening and really affecting a lot of industries, especially the creative industries. Because if you guys see on the slide here, right, even at the start of 2024, there was a very famous Japanese author named Ryo Kudan, and she wrote a book called Sympathy Tower Tokyo. Right. And then with the Sympathy Tower Tokyo, she submitted it and got Japan's most prestigious literary award, even though she had, despite admitting that 5% of the novel that she wrote was written by AI, right? So you can already see here, it's already affecting the potential for artists and creators or business people to just leverage it and having this more normalized. And beyond, and while you might be thinking, well, okay, 2024, that's really recent, even up to 2016, at the bottom right corner here, they created a short film using a script that was generated by AI completely, right? The film itself and the actors were real, but the script was just generated by AI. And then taking that a little bit step further, you see on the left side, the world's first feature-length AI-generated film is going to be produced in India, right? And they're really planning on leveraging only generative AI to create the film. So no, you're not going to see any computer graphics actors. Everything's just going to be generative AI. And then even right now, later after this course, you guys can check out on the right, The Frost. It's a short film published purely using DALL-E, right? So you guys will start exploring DALL-E in this course as well. But what the group of creators did was to compile a bunch of DALL-E images, and then used another AI tool to make their mouths and bodies kind of look like it's moving, and then create a short film out of that. Now, I do admit this film doesn't look the best, but it just gives you guys an example of like, this is just the beginning. Cool. So here, at this point, I'll put a little bit of a pause here, and I just want to ask. Maybe I'll call on one or two of you, to just sort of ask, what do you guys think? How do you guys think you guys can leverage GPT, Coke GPT into your workflow? So keep in mind, Coke GPT is based off of the GPT platform. So when you guys just think about, okay, ChatGPT, Coke GPT, these generative AI platforms, how do you feel like you can leverage this into your platform? So first, I'll just wait for anybody who wants to volunteer. Okay, what about Joy?
There are two Joys here, but I'll volunteer.
Okay, then Joy M.
Okay. Experimenting with ChatGPT, we have a bit of experience already because we use it in some of the exercises. I find it useful summarizing lengthy reading materials, and it gives me like the key points on what to highlight. But of course, it will require cross-checking with other references as well. But it does make summarizing and reading faster for our function. Thanks.
I completely agree. And just to kind of show you guys here, I will go, just because I know it says live demo, I just want to show you guys in the same way here, right? So just as Joy had mentioned, it's really a great tool for leveraging when it comes to, I think, especially whether you're working in sustainability or you're working in communications or marketing. I think one of the most common ways that I use it is documentation summarization or documentation insights, right? So just quickly here, if I'm going to show you guys a great example, I have this little document which I will pull from here. Let's say I add this. It's a little document I found on Google. It's about sustainability in the food and beverage industry for Southeast Asia, right? So let's say here can you guys all see my screen, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
So some of the ways you guys might be able to explore it is one tip that I'll give you is that always try to define the user persona at the very beginning, right? Obviously, if there's a general case, but I find that a lot of my friends or colleagues, they often miss this part. And so sometimes that might be why they get more general responses. So try to specificity is key here. So in this case, I might say, act as a researcher in the sustainability department. And I would say, read through this. And then what I tend to do is really emphasize what the document is, right? PDF. Because sometimes people may assume, I'll just read through this, but I really want to specify it's a PDF on the topic of, and then the topic is sustainability in the food and beverage industry, right? And then from here, I kind of give at this point, you can already press enter, but I like to take things a little bit further where I'll give it a couple of instructions, right? So let's say I want to say first create an index into sections starting with A labeled A, B, C, etc. So what this is going to do, you guys will see the logic behind this after, and I'll explain this after, but if you see here, sort and organize the content for a better learning curve. And so what I do here is oftentimes some documents, they can be written in a very complex manner, especially some of you that deal with a lot of like very technical terms, right? So I see someone in the chat talked about technical and non-technical terms, right? So yeah, some documents are very heavy, right? So this is where I always try to kind of put this little base where it's like, hey, just sort and organize it in a way where it's structured, the content is structured so it's easy for me to follow. Hence why I wrote down learning curve, right? You can also write so it's easier for me to follow, right? And then I also sometimes write extract key data points and information that would be useful for me to learn. And then maybe as an added bonus, ask me a couple of questions that can help me think about what to explore next, something like that, right? So if I say here, you guys will see, boom, boom, boom. So this is where I mentioned the whole, if you guys might be confused about the first point, and I said I'll explain, is I tend, especially with documentation, I always try to ensure that I'm creating an index. The reason for this is because it helps lay out and structure the document a bit better, right? Of course, there's going to be documents that are already indexed, but at least from when you guys are when you're referencing and speaking and interacting with the AI, it can help structure the content a little bit better for the AI to know, okay, so let me reference here, let me reference there, right? So if you see here, section A, introduction, section B, and then if I say, I'll go down and then give me key data points, right? And then questions to consider. So now, this is the questions. The last part here is for me to kind of better understand, okay, this helps me brainstorm. What more can I do to explore this document, right? So let's say if I want to explore sections D, the influence of attitudes on sustainability practices, then instead of me having to write all of that down again, this is exactly why I created that index. Sorry. So let's say it's like explore more about section D. And it's going to go through the documents and then boom. And it's going to go through and it just gives a little bit more key findings based off of the reference that you gave it before, right? And then you can, based off of these questions, this is really where it helps when it comes to not only document summarization, but analysis, because you can see I asked it to give me further questions for me to explore. So I said, how can we further enhance consumer awareness and knowledge about the importance of sustainability in the F&B industry? And then I can ask that question based on the document I provided, and I could just copy and paste that. And then it can start giving me a little bit more insights there. Somebody said that your ChatGPT is paid version. Yes, it is paid version because I do this for a living. So I need to, of course, I need a paid version. Can it read Excel files? Yes, can it read Excel files? This is actually an activity that I'll show that at the later half of the course. So definitely for sure, I'll show you guys that as well. Right. So right now it's kind of a little bit slow. My internet's slightly slow right now, so it's not creating everything. But I think you guys get the point in terms of summarization and documentation, right? So I hope, once again, I will repeat, specificity is key, and try to think of ways that not only just, oh, I want this to be summarized, but how can I use this as an index so it'll be a lot easier for me to speak with the AI in the future, right? So if you guys create an index, you can just refer to the index it created instead of typing everything out all the time. How do you manage know the know unknown? Sorry, Roger, can you specify that question?
Yes, thank you, Adi. Though sometimes, the ChatGPT or all the similar platforms, they have like hallucinations. So when they
Yes.
don't know the information, they start like making up like all the all the text, and it sounds like 100% convinced. So if you don't know, for instance, you can ask ChatGPT, explain me about, I don't know, black holes. We don't know anything about black holes, and all the information and the formulas, everything looks like totally coherent. So how you know that the information that ChatGPT is giving you is correct? It's not like a hallucination.
Yep. So that's a perfect question. It will segue into this next section. So I hope this will answer your question. So just looking at this right now, you guys can see right here on the bat, the benefits of using generative AI is that it's a really great inspiration tool, right? It's really great for brainstorming. It's really great for ideation. You guys saw from the questions, and that's one of the reasons why I kind of wrote that question out, is it gives me ways to think about how to explore this document better and brainstorming. And then obviously it's a lot faster in terms of it's automating. Somebody wrote here, it saves a lot of time in retyping, right? So it's the same thing, right? It's efficient. It helps automate certain processes that, while we may think, oh, that doesn't take too much time, it actually, in our day-to-day workflow, typing things that might take 30 seconds extra, that's, if you add those 30 seconds up, that's a lot of time, right? That can amount to a total of 5 to 10 minutes, right? And then you can also, one of the benefits is customizing and personalizing it. But as the question mentioned, right? But it's not perfect. It is not perfect at all, because once again, it goes into hallucinations, right? So as many of you may have stated in this call, hallucinations, right? So what are hallucinations? Hallucinations are essentially when it's creating non-factual information or is putting out things that doesn't actually make any sense, right? And so this can be really dangerous, especially when it comes to the supply chain, because if you do incorrect, let's say you ask it to predict like the inventory management, right? And you just rely on it solely, it might actually predict this falsely, or it might create numbers that don't even exist there. And then this can actually lead to a lot of disruption in the supply chain as itself. And as a whole, and another downfall to this, another downfall to this is that it doesn't really have a lot of context, right? Keep in mind, it's almost, you have to approach it kind of like, if you're going to meet somebody new, you can't just immediately assume they're going to know everything that's in your brain, even if they're an expert in whatever field, right? They need to really understand where you're coming from, what you're trying to solve, and what kind of problems you have. So this is one of the things that it lacks at the very front, but this is why you need to foster a consistent communication, right, with the AI, right? So going back to the whole point of hallucination, these are some examples, funny examples I found, right? So one example here, Fingster was the person asked for naming the 3 founders, and 1 out of the 2 founders was only correctly identified, right? And then at the right, you see something like, oh, tell me a country that starts with the letter V, and it says there are no countries with the letter V, which we all know not to be correct. I mean, there's Venezuela, there's Vietnam, right? So these are the types of things where it's a little bit problematic, right? So before going back to the earlier question, how do you manage to know whether or not it's incorrect? So this is part of the whole exploration process, right? You can't completely depend only on these AI platforms to give you all the answers, right? There still needs to be some level of human intervention that needs to be involved, right? So which comes to my key point on this slide. One of the to-dos, things that you should not be doing, is giving AI sensitive data regarding yourself or even the company you work with. And this is one of the key reasons why it's so important to leverage Coke GPT, because Coke GPT is to solve that problem where everybody working in Coke can still leverage the platform, and all the data will be held, and any sensitive data will be held, particularly within Coke itself, right? So for privacy issues and whatnot. So you have to keep in mind, if you guys leverage things like ChatGPT or external third-party platforms, they can ultimately be hacked. And if they get hacked, all of that data is going to be released. So that's why do not use external AI platforms for sensitive data. And then going back to the whole customer service, like the chatbot example, do not rely wholly on AI to just give you the best customer, even though it does a great job at thinking outside the box. Don't rely on it wholly. You still need to keep tabs on it, making sure that it's giving the right answers. And then, of course, it goes without saying, do not rely on high stake decision making for AI, right? So perhaps things like contracts, maybe you can ask the AI to read through the contract, answer specific clauses within the contract to kind of simplify it. But it's best not recommended to actually ask it for legal advice or any advice on how to navigate through certain contractual agreements, right? Instead, maybe you can ask for suggestions of ideas, but never relying on it wholly. Right. So going once again, rinsing back on that question, because it is a common question that a lot of people ask. How do we know that it's correct? There's never really a best way to know, right? This is why, from my side, I often actually ask it to, especially if I'm doing research, I actually ask the GPT or whatever platform I'm using to provide references at the end, right? And then if they give the references, then I click on the references and I actually read through the page to see if it actually makes sense. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, right? And things like platforms like Perplexity, which I shared with you earlier, they do a better job at giving citations. So those are some cool ways to definitely leverage. Cool. So yeah, oops. So before I continue, I want to open up for a discussion again. So what is one way that you guys have leveraged generative AI in your personal or professional life? So please, I want you guys to share in the chat, and I will call 2 people to share their experiences. But in the meanwhile, please feel free to write down in the chat as well, so we can all kind of see what everybody thinks thus far. Don't be shy. So what about Catherine? Catherine Calas. Catherine, are you on this call? Oh, yes, she's on this call. Catherine? Maybe you're muted. Okay, maybe while we wait for her to kind of get settled, what about Amanda? Amanda Wu? Is Amanda on this call?
Yes. Hi.
Hi,
So
Amanda.
hi. I'm in the early adopter group to use Copilot. So Copilot has been really useful in key actions, key points for the meeting from the meetings and what are the key action items. You can also use it to summarize what are the priorities or to-do list for the next week. And they can access your emails or discussions that come in your way and help you plan your week more efficiently.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And do you feel like it's really optimized a lot of your workflow, whether it's your workflow or your just day-to-day flow?
Yeah, I think it's especially helpful if you away for 1 or 2 weeks on holidays and you coming back with a lot of emails and you know quite overwhelming, and that's a good way to start.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing. Yeah, much like Amanda said, I see Louise also said, I use Gen AI to create my function, culture, club logo, and slogan. Yes, fantastic. At the end of this call, you guys will also be, at the end of this course, you guys will also be getting into an activity to generate some ad campaign ideas. Joy also wrote Coca-Cola greeting card for year end to thank our stakeholders. Yes, perfect. Right. So much in the same way I've used it for, similar to Amanda, organize certain parts of my schedule. And thank you, Amanda, for sharing. And then document summary, quick data analysis, ideas generation. There's so many ways that you can leverage AI into your workflow. So then we move on to comparing generative AI with other traditional models, right? So this is brief. Since I did talk about this briefly, I'll kind of go through it. So when it comes to traditional models, there's three kind of ways you can think of it, right? Traditional data methods, then traditional AI, and then there's generative AI. So traditional data is really just the same thing I mentioned earlier. You're just collecting, analyzing, and then interpreting the data through typically traditional data scraping methods. And then when it comes to traditional AI, you're really focusing on building out or leveraging AI already pre-made systems and then feeding that data to perform specific tasks that help you decide better, right? So in the case, I guess in the case of like supply chain, for example, you can you can kind of leverage machine learning models to predict inventory needs, and then you can then prevent stockouts. And then even when it comes to things like if you're working in the department where sustainability is a very key function, right? So you can leverage AI, traditional AI, to analyze consumer sentiment on social media or on blogs or forums, and then you can sort of tailor the messaging that you have in your communications to fit that narrative that people are speaking about, right? And then, of course, there's generative AI, as I mentioned earlier, all about generation, creation. And as you guys see here, same thing as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of strengths and weaknesses. I mean, a lot of strengths and also pitfalls to each of them. So neither one is perfect. It's more about trying to leverage all of them into your workflow, whether it's a combination of all three, or maybe just choosing the right one for a specific use case, right? So traditional data methods you guys see here, the strengths is that there's some transparency, there's a little bit more control that you guys have. Versus traditional AI, it's a lot more scalable, and it's a bit more. It's a lot better for predictive analytics. And then with generative AI, there's a little bit better for more creative tasks, stepping out of the box of what you already know. Right. And then some of the limitations with generative AI, as mentioned, are some hallucinations, resource intensive. With traditional AI, there's difficulty for interpretation. And then also with traditional data, it's not very scalable, right? And it requires a lot of manual labor. Excuse me.